Good. Okay, now I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to start again. Yes.
All right. So my talk is on Ajax, which is a middleware term used to link HTML to the middle, which is JavaScript and PHP, and the back, which is MySQL. So I've got loaded here the web browser, and I also have the source code for this web page. So right now I'm in example 1, which is form named test1, and it has 3 objects inside the form. One of them is a text box, and the other 2 are buttons. So I'm going to go back and click on the first button, and it does an alert and puts a code to it puts that text from the inside the text box onto the screen. If I put junk in the next 2 boxes and go back and hit the global button, you'll see it has pulled the code from the first text box, the second text box, and the third box. Even though they're in different forms, it can go and get any data from off the screen. So that's the first lesson in DOM, to document object model naming. The document is the main part of the document is the page, and then test 1 and test 2 are the names of the forms, and then you have the field name and then the value of the field name, which is a property. All right, so that's how that works. And then the second example is actually going to call this JavaScript up here and do exactly the same thing. It's going to concatenate. This plus sign is a concatenation operator, and it's going to concatenate those 2 fields with this string literal. And that happens like this. Very simple. All right. The third example, I'm actually going to go up and use PHP. And this is going to use the real-time HTML command called onKey. And I'll show you the source code here. So this is on key up. Every time I press a key and let loose, it's going to go call this JavaScript function here, which is in this piece of code up here. So let's pick a year. I picked 1998 because I only have 3 records in there, 3 rows in the table. And if you hit the E character, what it has done, it has called that JavaScript. That JavaScript has constructed an HTML call with a get with those 2 fields in it, and that has called a PHP program, which has gone out and gotten 3 lines of text and brought them back and put them in here. So that's all that has happened there. It's rather complex. And there's how you get one row returned. And the first line there is actually telling you how many rows came back. So here's what the JavaScript looks like. This is the program that's called from HTML every time a key is let up. And it's doing a little bit of, here's the first debug statement. You know, the first, like I've already shown you in the first example, you always want to make sure you're getting the right data to the JavaScript. And that's why this debug statement is right there. And then the next thing that happens is this is the JavaScript objects that's going to do the call to PHP. So then I know what the PHP is. I've listed it here, and then I've appended the standard get syntax to add 2 parameters after the call to the PHP. and then this is what it would look like. And then I add a random string at the end, just so that I can fool the browser in that every time I do this, I'm making a different call, and that gets a new copy in the cache every time. So you step the method that is looking for what to do when it detects a state change, and then you actually call the open, and then you send that command. And so when it detects a state change, it goes and takes the text that comes back from the PHP and assigns it to that big text area, and that's what that blue highlighted text does. And if you go back and look here at the source, wrong example. Oh, where'd it go? I got to go back here. If you look at this, you'll see that the big text area is in fact called name, just like in the JavaScript would predict. Where'd it go? There. The thing is name, and its property that we're adjusting is the value of that text box. And so that's how that gets populated. Okay, so that's the first example. The next example I'm going to show you is actually using the UVA read-only LDAP server to do pretty much the same thing. Every time I press a key in this box and get a valid hit from the LDAP server, it's going to return me a string. The string is going to look like this, and then the JavaScript is going to break this into 4 strings and assign them to these 4 fields right here. So having done this 1.5 million times, I know that this is a real person, my cousin Roland, and then there's me. And the JavaScript is exactly the same. You just have a different set of PHP calls to go in and access the online UVA LDAP server. Okay. So now we're going to look at a real MySQL example that allows me to change data. So this busy little form has what has happened here. I've pulled 3 rows of data out of the table. This is the select statement I used. It's those same 3 rows I showed you a little while ago. And it's pulled up the person's name and their time in some mythical race. And it's also displayed that in tabular form down here using a PHP loop. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just, without changing this time, I'm going to push the Fred button, and PHP goes off and tries to update the table, and it's actually smart enough to know that nothing happened. It says no rows were changed, and so I then take the code that comes out of that update statement and send it back to the JavaScript, which then dumps the string no change into that text box. If I change this and hit Fred again, it says 1 row has changed. That's coming from the MySQL, tells PHP, PHP tells JavaScript, JavaScript dumps it into that HTML text box, and the photons come out and hit you in the back of the eyeball. So And this down here is just confirming that that's what happened. Now, the the JavaScript is actually at the top here. I included it in the HTML. You can do that in line, so you can see what happens. So here's the PHP that's being called. Here's the construction of the get statement, and it goes off and sends it. And then here, you'll see in a minute what the PHP is constructing as the results clause. And if the results is no change, you just call a program to reload the page, and you dump that results into the text box. And this is another way of finding the text box that doesn't require you to know the full DOM element name. You can actually, if you have a unique element name on the page, on the HTML page, you can use this get element by ID and stuff it in that way. So that's another key part of the document object module. And there's the text box that has not a name, but it has an ID database status. Now notice that's something you have to, if you want to use the get element by function or method, you have to declare the text box with an ID rather than a name. See, I've used name and ID are both valid modifiers to a input text box, and they have slightly different purposes. So that's another little key point. Now, if you look at the PHP, this is has the suffix text simply because I've made a Unix link to an object which is a text file. And that way the interpreter in the web server doesn't interpret it, and you actually get to see the source. So here's what happens. Here's the way the get variables from JavaScript are put into a local variable. These two lines here are for testing, so you can prove that this PHP works the way you want. This is the username and password information, which I'm not going to give you. It's off my DB-M2 server. And then here's the update statement, which is legal MySQL. And you call the query. You use this affected rows to tell you how many you get back. And if you get an error, you do this. If the results value is greater than 0, you tell them how many rows were changed. Else, you echo back no change. So this is what that HTML object is returning to the JavaScript. It's just a simple print statement. And if you can do this from the command line, and you'll see exactly that. The first time you